How does the data for the 2500 widget order get from Spacely to Acme? Each decade had its defining technology. In the 1970s, a Spacely employee printed out the order from the advanced Spacely system, stuck it in an envelope and mailed it to Acme. An Acme employee opened the envelope and keyed the order into the Acme system, typing 25,000 instead of 2,500. In the 80s, a Spacely employer printed out the order from the advanced Spacely system and faxed it to Acme. An Acme employer grabbed the order from the fax machine output bin and keyed the order into the Acme system, typing 25,000 instead of 2,500. In the 1990s, a Spacely employee pulls the order out of the advanced Spacely system and emails it to Acme. An Acme employee grabs the order from his or her inbox and rekeys the order into the Acme system, typing 25,000 instead of 2,500. This all sounds a little bit more efficient than the business order with which you're familiar. Keep in mind that this whole process is repeated in the opposite direction when Acme wants to invoice Spacely for the 25,100 widgets. What stops Spacely's computer talking directly to Acme's? Column names may be different. Acme's programmers may choose part number and Spacely's may use part num. To humans they look the same, but to the computer they might as well be completely different. Worse yet are the differences in the meaning of what is in that column. Acme has a different part number for the same widget than does Spacely. Nor need there be a one-to-one mapping between columns. Suppose Spacely's data model uses a single text field for shipping address, and Acme breaks up the address into lines 1, 2, city, state, postal code, and country code columns. Nor finally need there be a one-to-one mapping between tables. Spacely could spread an order across multiple tables. An order wouldn't contain an address at all. Just a factory ID, you'd have to join with the factories table if you wanted to print out one order with a meaningful shipping address. Acme might just have one wide table with some duplication of data. Multiple orders to the same factory would just contain duplicate copies of the factory address. We could fix this problem the way GM did. Go over to Germany and buy some data models from SAP. They make every division of the company use these data models in the same part numbers for the same screws. Total cost? About 1 billion. A smart investment? How could you doubt GM? This is the company that spent $5 billion on robots at a time when they could have purchased all of Toyota for about the same sum. Anyway, the bureaucrats at MIT were so fattened by the undergrads paying $23,000 a year and so impressed by GM's smart move that they bought SAP data models too. My advisor was skeptical that the data models designed for a factory would work at a university. Sure they will, I said. You just have to think of each major as an assembly line. You'll probably be modeled as a painting robot. Was my faith in SAP shaken? 2 calendar years and 40 person years into the installation process, MIT still wasn't really up and running? Absolutely not. SAP is the best thing that ever happened to computer people. It appeals to business people that are too stupid to understand and model their own processes, but too rich to simply continue relying on secretaries and file cabinets. So they want to buy SAP or a set of data models from one of SAP's competitors. But since they can't understand their business process well enough to model themselves, they aren't able to figure out which product is the best match for these processes. So they hire consultants to tell them which product to buy. So this was from Philip Alex's Guide to WebAssembly. This is from 1998. And
oh my gosh!
Yeah, welcome to this is calling this Out Data Podcast number 1. Neo, you are the one. Your name's not Neo. Your name's Nathan Cunningham. So 27 years later, how much has changed in the world of ERPs?
How much? So now it's on the cloud.
Okay. Yeah, so we're fat fingering order entries into the cloud, into the cloud of 25,000.
Into the cloud rather than the on-premise server. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So what? So you're building a thing called QuickBuild, which is, I think, is a bold attempt to bring an ERP, to make an ERP that belongs in the 21st century or in the 2020s. You know, because I don't think a lot of them really do. How did you get started with ERPs? I'm assuming you used them and it frustrated you and you're like, I've got to fix this, or tell me a story.
Yeah, so I worked at 2 Fortune 500 companies. I worked for Ingersoll Rand Train, and I also worked for Tesla. And both of those companies, so Ingersoll Rand, they were actually in the middle of some crazy big Oracle migration when I got hired. And the CEO said at one point, it's taking way too long. I hate how long this is taking. Just get it done. We just need to stop being, it's like we need to stop wasting so much time and resources on this stupid project, right? Which was fine. And then at Tesla, Elon is notoriously anti-software, anti-third parties. So he actually got some open source ERP software, took it and had some software engineers take it over and deploy it to Tesla and SpaceX, the different instances, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But, and so, by the time I left Tesla, this custom built ERP was actually pretty decent, and there was no per user license fees, right? And we had high software costs, but it actually did what we want rather than paying for consulting, right? Like, which, there's a role for consultants. But after I quit Tesla 3 years ago, I helped implement Microsoft Dynamics for a couple of companies.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's one of those things, it's like, I've been around tech a bunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I quit, I was like, I don't want to deal with ERPs, because they're just this big monolith. But I realize how much opportunities there is there to make things better. And I realized that there's still very few people that are really pushing the agenda on ERP functionality and design. And so, I went through this ERP implementation for Dynamics, and I was blown away at how complicated some of these things were. And I consider myself a smart person. I'm a data guy. I've been on the operations side, data side, technical and business. Like I get it, right? Like I understand a lot of the moving parts, right? I imported a bomb in like a week, and the consultant that they had hired had never seen that before, right? And it was like, perfect, good. It's like I got you, right? Like I can do this, It's like, but the level of sophistication required to onboard a company that's just trying to run a manufacturing line is way too high, and so that combined, seeing that combined with wanting to get out of consulting and wanting to provide more product related things led me to build QuickBuild.
Yeah, you mentioned Dynamics. I integrated with the precursor of Dynamics. I think it was a precursor, which was Great Plains. If you've ever seen that one, yeah.
Which is sunsetting.
It hasn't already sunk into the depths of the night already.
Right, no.
Oh, okay. It's still been sunsetted.
Yeah.
And that was again, the system couldn't do what people wanted to do with it, and so we just sort of made this ersatz kind of thing around it, keying into the database. But you're right, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all model. And you mentioned before about the consultants. A lot of these ERPs, like, they expect the business to change to the ERP and not the ERP to change to the business. I don't know if you've seen that Simpsons meme with Principal Skinner, and he's like, am I out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong. I always think of that. So, why do you think that is? Why do you think all these ERPs are trying to make the business change to how they operate and not vice versa?
So there's a history from SAP.
Okay.
So, before even their on-prem standard products, right? They customized everything. SAP customized everything. They were a custom software shop, and they had their baseline, but they didn't install it to anyone. They went in and they customized everything, and I think this is described in the book Blue Ocean Strategy, I believe. Anyway, SAP wanted to standardize, right? They're like, hey, we're doing way too much customization. It makes it difficult to do, database changes, right? There's tons of logic we have to figure out. And so they decided, hey, we're going to standardize everything. So they went to their customers, they figured it out, like, hey, what's the same, what's different? And they realized that the only module, right, they're looking at, finance and supply chain and operations and marketing and sales. The only process that was identical across all their different customers was accounting, because everyone used GAAP accounting, right? And so they made a strategic decision that they're going to create a standard product centered around accounting. And Oracle did the same thing, and they all did the same thing. So they all started with accounting. So, hey, this is what we need from an accounting perspective. And then they built on modules to just feed into accounting. that fits. So literally, all the other modules are just designed to feed into that one thing, right? Which, as an enterprise, it's still helpful, and that's the tricky thing. If you're Nike, if you're Under Armour, it's like if you're Walmart, you need a central accounting place, right? It's like there's no way you can handle this volume of transactions without a centralized place for accounting. Like I get it.
That does make sense, because accounting people seem to be the only people that like SAP and the like. I've noticed that. So that makes sense.
But here's the thing, is everything else and everyone else acts differently. And it's difficult to design software that can accommodate differences. And it's tough. It's challenging. And they just decided that they were just not going to bother, right? And so, you have these third-party integrations that they're okay with, and, they can, APIs and whatnot. But yeah, that's how it started. I mean, that's why SAP and Oracle and Dynamics, that's why they're all so complicated.
Because
they don't really work for many people.
It's interesting, because I saw your demo of QuickBuild, and it made very intuitive sense to me. It almost, I could kind of see, if I just put my technical head on, I could kind of see that you were sort of defining a database schema. That's what it looked like to me anyway. Sort of on the fly, like you have to sing. It was Santa's Workshop, was it? You did in 5 minutes.
Oh yeah. I did a Santa's Workshop, yeah.
And you're just kind of clicking things, and it looks almost like you're using like a visual thing for like making a database thing, but then you click the build button, I think it was. And I was very impressed by that. And one thing that was very clear to me is like you can kind of do almost you're not very limited by what you can do with that model. It's almost the exact opposite approach, where like here's you fit your square peg into this round hole, and you're kind of saying well, make your own pegs, or this is a terrible analogy. You know what I mean? You're like saying, here's what your business does. You just sort of set it up, which I thought was such an obvious thing to do. I'm surprised it hasn't sort of been done before, or I didn't think of it either.
It's a little bit of it's I love ragging on other systems that
we can.
I don't even have an accounting function. Yeah, I don't even have an accounting function yet. So there's still limitations for now, right? Like but I definitely have come from the approach of when I was thinking about this, there were like core fundamental flaws with these systems, right? And you had mentioned one earlier, where we have to adjust to the software rather than the software adjusting to us, right? And it's and from a design perspective, like if you're going to design a system that can service a bunch of customers globally, like that's not the way you would design it. There's no way.
They're the only ones that can get away with that. I've never been able to do that. I've never been able to say, listen, this is how I want my software to work. You kind of deal with it. It's not, only they can do it. I've never been able to do that.
It's the only software product on the planet.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, this is, it is what it is, so take it or leave it. And you're like, well, I guess we'll spend $1 billion. What is what you said? Yes.
Yeah. That was in 1998, so it's probably more now. Yeah.
But yeah, like I just think, the other thing that really bugged me is anytime there was a massive ERP failure, you Google ERP failures, right? And there's all this commentary, right? There's all this commentary. Every single piece of commentary, 99% of it is, oh, well, it's a people problem.
Yeah. Is it?
So not only, so this is wild. So, so what you said, like, hey, this is my software, take it or leave it. And you don't have very many options because otherwise it'll cost you millions of dollars to switch, right? Switching costs are crazy high. Not only that, but, hey, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, you're talking about how they always blame the people and not the software, right?
Oh, yeah. Not only that, not only are you going to keep our software, but if you don't like our software, it's your fault. Like, Like, that is insane.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but in my life, it's like, what's
It's
easier
insane.
to change, software or human beings? And in my experience, it's been software. Yeah, it's
Always
super
software.
interesting, right? Like, yeah, that's why we get into it. Well, that's kind of why I got into it. It's easy to change.
Oh yeah.
So,
I, it's funny. I come from more of a supply chain background, right? Those are
okay.
the roles
Oh,
I
really?
had.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so like I managed a team of buyers. I was a buyer. I was a strategy.
All right. So
Quick.
you're like a supply chain person first before you became a technologist.
Yeah,
Oh,
but in
okay.
all the supply chain roles I've had, I've been the technologist on all the teams. Like Nathan's the data guy, right? Go to him
Ah,
for the technical stuff. And it's for me, that was the fun part of the job,
mm-hmm.
right? It's all the other stuff. It's I was telling someone the other day, I didn't actually like negotiating with vendors,
Oh, yeah, no.
right? Like, which was part of the job
Mm.
as a procurement manager, right? You negotiate with vendors, right? That's what you do. And I didn't really like that part of the job. But the data, the computers, the systems,
Mm.
I like that because they're much easier than dealing with people.
Yeah, I'll tell you the amount of work I've done dealing with like an SAP, not so much SAP, more Great Plains, a bit of JD Edwards, dealing with their data formats and sort of building around it and realizing they're not meant to be looked at by human beings. They're not meant for public consumption, but because the software around it is so kind of concrete and kind of unchangeable, you kind of have to build around it. You can't really do it within their system, so you kind of have to like patch into the database. It's a real nightmare.
It's crazy. It is
Mm.
crazy how yeah, how much you have to fit yourself into this
Mm.
system,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so fundamental flaws. The other big one that really bothered me,
Mm-hmm.
right? One, the customer's always wrong. Two, the people are always at fault. Three,
The
everyone
customer's
has to do it our
always sorry.
way.
The customer's always wrong. Yeah, that's the first thing they teach you in business school, I imagine.
It,
Yeah.
yeah. So the the other thing that's just core, it's so when you're selling, the end users are not the customers.
No.
And
No.
that's a big problem. It's
Mm.
like it's the CEO, the C-suite that's deciding what software to use, which won't change. That's fine. But the distance between the CEO and the end users is so
Oh,
vast,
it's ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, there's no way that a CEO should have any influence over what a buyer is doing on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
Like,
That's
that's
micro. Yeah.
crazy.
That's
Yeah.
micromanaging.
And yet they're making the decisions on and they're telling the consultants how much budget they have, right? And then it's like, hey, we're way over budget, and this poor buyer, this poor accountant is like, hey, so this actually still takes me hours and hours. And it's like, well, find a workaround. Like, okay,
Well, it doesn't always
thanks.
work out. It doesn't always work out with the CEOs. You mentioned like headlines about SAP failing. So there was a local one here in New Zealand where a company called Mitre 10, I think
Oh,
equivalent to your Home Depot, like hammers and wood and
oh,
that kind of
sure.
thing, right? And then the
Yeah,
headline
yeah.
was traumatizing SAP rollout leaves Mitre 10 in the red. Which is very. I don't mean to laugh at the company, but it is a very funny thing. So it doesn't. I know that a lot of the buying and the purchasing decisions of these big global ERPs are touted as a C-suite, but there's a lot of failure stories where it hasn't worked out well for them. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And to be clear to anyone listening, I aspire to be a better ERP. Right
Mm.
now, we're very lightweight. We're really not designed for anyone that does more than like 10 million in revenue, right? So it's like that's definitely like
Mm.
the range that we're playing in right now. But I am offering free customizations for 3 months to help people get started, which free consulting for 3 months is unheard of. So
Yeah. No. Quite a bit.
happy to do that. Yeah, but just it's like SAP has its place.
Sure.
I
Sure.
want to give credit where credit's due, but you know, I'm hoping that over the next few years we can take on some decent market share.
Well, you have to start somewhere, and I think for any new ERP system, that number you mentioned under 10 million is probably where you have to start, right? They're the people that are probably going to be going from. I would imagine you correct me. That are probably going to be going from no ERP system where I don't know, we're writing things and put them in filing trays or whatever the hell we're doing, emailing spreadsheets, and from we need an ERP system. So you can get the first buyer's advantage there, right? Because like you can be the first thing that they ever use, and maybe as they grow, it can go there. Because I feel like your idea would obviously you have to start somewhere, but with the smaller companies. But I feel like the key thing of your idea is like of you define the workflows, you define the data models, or the customer does. I don't see why that couldn't scale to larger enterprises.
Yeah, I actually think that. Because of the IT resources that big enterprises have, I think the model I have is actually better fit for large enterprises. I just don't have all the features they need yet, right? No. But I think, software, data, it's like software, like version control, Git management, right? It's like that doesn't really exist. That's not really integrated into an ERP, right? Like some companies will have their own version control thing, their tracking process, right? But for us, one of the things we've envisioned, and who knows if we'll ever build it, but if we ever get to enterprise scale, let's build a versioning system where you have an items master page, right? Or a sales process or whatever, and you want to make a change, you're a user, great. You make the change and then you submit it for approval and it goes through a change management process and then IT approves it, accounting approves it, make sure that you didn't screw anything up. It's like, that's fine. It's like, that's okay. But now the whole burden of developing the system is no longer on IT, right? Whereas right now it is, right? IT has to do 100% of all development in an ERP system.
Yeah.
And I think over time, as we get bigger, we can shift that, and we can say, let's move it to, let's offload that. We can spread that workload, and not put so much burden on IT, and enable business users to get what they want, right? So, and I don't know, who knows if we'll ever go enterprise, but that's the idea.
I definitely think that would be I definitely could go there. And because you mentioned versioning, so because you're starting this from 2024 or 2025, you can kind of, you can have basic things that we take for granted now in modern software development. That's very much lacking in the big ERPs, like data versioning. We have a lot of mature versioning models now. Probably not going to be some kind of homespun thing. I'm curious. Is my intuition right? I don't know how much you can go into the back end of how it works. But is my intuition right that as you're clicking on the screen, you are defining a relational schema?
So there's a little bit of database secret sauce.
Okay, that's fine.
So I won't share a lot, but here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say. Is typically, and people can fill in the gaps. Typically, you have a predefined database, and you have a column for part number, and on the screen you have part number, right? No big deal, and it's kind of everything is predefined, right? So what we've done is we've said for one instance of QuickBuild or one company of QuickBuild, here are the definitions of all the pages and whatever. And then it lets the user, so we create definitions on when you sign up, right? We create a definition for you. And then you can now change that definition if you want, but that's the core. And then the pages just dynamically render based off of what definition you've changed it to.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very cool way of doing things. You also mentioned a bit how the other ERPs are based on accounting first. You haven't got to accounting. I'm imagining accounting is fairly static. Like, I think if you get too innovative there, I think you go to jail and stuff. So, right? Like, if you get too disruptive with how you do accounting. So, I would
We're
imagine
going to revolutionize accounting.
Yeah,
we're going all non-compliant. We're shaking things up.
We're going to make the accounting
I'm going
world
to prison.
Yeah, we're going to make the accounting world a better place. It's ripe for disruption. But I mean, that kind of a module, you'd have to have less flexibility, and that's probably one of the reasons they look the same. I'm not an accountant at all, obviously. That's probably one of the reasons they look the same between all the ERPs, right? That's quite a static, the guardrail thing of what you have to do for accounting.
Yeah, so the reason we're targeting small businesses is oftentimes they'll start with QuickBooks or Xero, right? They'll start with these, accounting systems because it's a great way to get started. I use QuickBooks for my own business, my own consulting business, right? It's great. And then they realize that there's limitations and they say, I need more, right? At that point, they say, I should invest in an ERP system. But the problem with that, and what people don't understand, is an ERP system is an accounting system. So there's just switching from one accounting system to the next accounting system without getting the operational improvements that they want, right? So what I'm offering is, hey, everything else, you keep QuickBooks. I don't care. You feel free. Keep QuickBooks all you want. Like I don't want to, disrupt that. And, the goal is that, by the end of this year, we'll be able to integrate with QuickBooks and Xero, where if you do something there, you can feed it back to us. If we do something, we can feed it back to you, right? Things like that. For costing and for inventory and whatever else, right? So people upgrade, but they don't actually get the benefits of an ERP because they're still stuck trying to get the accounting sorted out.
So you could focus straight on the operational story, which is where there is the most variance between companies, and leave almost the standalone accounting systems as they are. Kind of the goal,
Yeah. And again, I don't know if I'll ever launch an accounting module. Time will tell. But certainly the first step in the near future, it'll only be integrations with QuickBooks and Xero and maybe some others. But that's certainly the intent to start.
When you look at something like QuickBooks and you look at something like Xero and you sort of compare it to what people are doing, the kinds of software people are using on the operational side, why do you think... Okay, first off, I guess two-part question. Do you think that there is a big gap? And if you do think there is a big gap in kind of quality, maturity, and technological kind of modernness, why do you think that gap exists? Why does supply chain tech often seem to be quite behind in other parts than other sort of hybrid tech things? Fintech, that kind of thing.
I got a lot of opinions on this.
Please. I see it existing, but I can never wrap my mind around it because I think there's a lot of money in this industry. Why are they still operating like the 90s? I don't get it. So please go ahead.
Okay. So let's start with the dawn of time. No. But I joke. But honestly, the reason is because supply chain as a function hasn't really become mainstream except for the last 20 years.
Really?
Right? Like, okay, 200 years. Let's go 200 years ago. Not the dawn of time, but 200 years ago, 1800s. You go to you want to be an enterprising person. What do you learn? You learn finance. You learn sales. Right?
No logistics. Yeah.
You don't learn just and again, it was kind of a product of the 90s, the 80s and 90s, where all of a sudden we became a global society. China obviously took on a ton, and the term supply chain become common, because it's a global supply chain, right? So one thing is that supply chain has not matured, right? As it's not just the technology, it's the actual function. It's just that we need another 30 years before we get there, right? There's one other reason. There's one other big reason. And that is because supply chain is the only function within business that is data software dependencies, right? When you think of dependencies, supply chain is the only function in a business that has dependencies on potentially thousands of people.
Yeah, all your upstream, all your downstream people you're partnering with.
Yeah.
It's a. Oh, and now I have to go off a little bit. Sorry. It's it's a completely from a distributed systems perspective. It's a completely different data model. People are often talking about how can I get a single source of truth and how can I get everything consistent. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you can't, because these data systems operate independently. If they coordinate, they lose their independence. So unless you have like there's a name of a law where like the data systems match like the corporate structure. So unless you're like under the one corporate structure, you're not going to have a unified data system. So sorry, I had to go over that because people don't realize that you can't have that complete end-to-end flow that maybe you kind of where you control everything that maybe you kind of can with fintech to an extent or with accounting to an extent. You mentioned supply chain. I actually didn't know that. It actually never occurred to me that supply chain was so new. I suppose since I got into the professional world, it had been a thing and a term and something that people were talking about. But so yeah, you said before that like it wasn't really part of the business education until like, relatively recently, in the last few decades, I would say.
Yeah. I'm guessing, and I don't know for sure. I'm guessing that 30 years ago, there were probably a dozen universities that had degrees in logistics, is what they called it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
They just did the logistics portion of it, and so I think, yeah, like it. Now there's hundreds, but there really wasn't a focus on it. And to be fair, it's like there didn't need to be, because if you operated, a small grocery store in your town, right, or corner store, whatever, right, or a manufacturer, it's like you just bought from local people. Everything was local. Supply chains don't exist when you're local.
It's very much a product or very much comes into focus as a product of globalization. It's kind of took off around that time.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, the function of issuing a purchase order and buying stuff, that's been around forever, right? 2,000 years.
Sure.
Right? It's like that's been around for forever. But the idea that we have to coordinate with hundreds of people all of our purchase orders, and they're all in different countries and have different, compliance requirements or whatever, right? It's like that piece is relatively new. Yeah,
I see what you mean. So it's almost like because I love computer. I'm a big computer. I love computer science, but I do admit that it's a young field, right? I don't think we're quite mature there. We're definitely maturing, and people definitely are pushing the envelope. But it's not, this isn't civil engineering yet. We can say, right? And so what you're kind of saying with the newness of supply chain, or sort of the newness of supply chain being like a focal point for people. I suppose what we kind of has is the confluence of two relatively young fields coming together, and so maybe that's why we can say fintech tech is new, but fin is ancient, right? So that right. That gets along a bit better, but supply chain tech, those are, I suppose, two relatively new things. I actually never thought about it that way.
And here's the thing is, again, going back to the dependencies, supply chain's dependent. If I'm at Tesla, for example, right? And this is just a hypothetical. This didn't actually happen. But let's say I need a steering wheel, right? And so my steering wheel supplier has to make them every day for me. And they have a supplier that provides the texture, right? The leather or the fake leather. I don't think Tesla uses leather, but fake leather, right? Sure. So they have the fake leather, right? That company has to, the fake leather company actually purchases their fake leather from someone else. So it's like a wholesale, and then make to spec or something like that to get into a raw material shape that works, right? And then that company that's actually the one, synthesizing the raw material, they have all this equipment, and one of the pieces of equipment break down, there's a spare part, but they can't get the spare part because their supplier who provides that spare part is run by this small company, and the office manager has been sick for a week.
Yeah,
like
it trickles down.
That is the level. Like, if someone is out of town 7 layers deep, like, it can cause problems for me. I don't know that person, right?
Yeah, it's like chewing gum. Like, as the chain gets longer, it's easy to break. Right?
Yeah,
You're shipping from here to here to here. Yeah, I try. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, some of this stuff is more pertinent, or sort of came earlier from where I live, because I live in an island. I don't. If you ever circle where I live in Google Maps, you just blue, right? So we're relatively new to, like, importing things. We don't have that huge internal economy like America, but
I went to school in Hawaii.
Oh, okay. There we go. Oh, right. You're a fellow fellow Pacific person. There we go.
Yes, I don't live there anymore, but yeah, I understand island life.
Yeah. So you get it. Now, ours are relatively big islands in the sense of things, but yeah, it's I imagine the Hawaiian supply chains are very long and very thin as well. Yeah, I mean, Hawaii is one of the only other parts of the world I can say is also a long way from anywhere. Very long and very thin.
Yeah.
I'm curious. There's a lot of legislation around traceability, which is something I've been following. So, for a bit of background, I got started with the supply chain stuff with livestock traceability. In New Zealand and Australia, animals have to have an ID. Because they can't carry, wallets with their hooves and get them out. It's very clumsy. They just have an ear tag with an RFID in them, and every animal has to have an RFID. And when they go from farm to farm, it's designed to prevent a disease outbreak, right? So that's where I got started, and I notice that's all legislated in law in New Zealand and Australia, a few other jurisdictions that we dealt with. And I noticed these kind of, not so much with livestock, but with other things. Batteries are a big one, and now starting to be legislation from where they come across, especially in the EU. Often people see what the EU are doing, and they kind of copy it to a certain extent. In the United States with FSMA, that's starting to happen with fresh fruit. Yeah. I feel like the supply chain tech industry as it stands now is not so well equipped to deal with these new regulations around traceability. How do you think it's going to cope, and what do you think will end up happening?
Yeah, I listened to a great talk at a conference last year from the chief supply chain officer for Chipotle. Mm-hmm. And Chipotle obviously was in the news for the wrong things a number of years ago, and they went through a supply chain transformation where they got 100% traceability of everything. Right. That was a core tenet of.
So sorry, I'm not familiar with the Chipotle thing. Was it like a food scandal, something like that?
Oh yeah. You know what Chipotle is?
It's like a fast food thing, right?
It's a burrito place.
Yeah.
We get burritos and bowls, and
so there was like a food scandal, and that got in the news, and then they were like, right, we're doing food traceability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember what the scandal was, but for like 6 months, it was like they were just tanking.
Right, yeah.
Nobody wanted to eat there because who knows?
Who knows what's in the burrito? Okay, right, yeah.
Who knows what's in the burrito? So they went through this whole thing, and so from a capability, from a technology perspective, we have everything we need, I believe, to get 100% traceability, right? If Chipotle can do it, every food place on the planet can do it. And if every food place on the planet can do it, then there's no reason why we go to the next kind of sector, industrial, right? Chemicals, let's say, there's no reason chemicals could do it. And if chemicals can do it, there's no reason that metal can't do it, right? So, you just kind of expand, and there's no reason why. And so it's not necessarily technology that's the limiter, right? It's time and people that know. See, here's the thing, is how many people on the planet know accounting? A billion, right? Because accounting's been around for forever,
Sure.
right? You know, and even if you don't know accounting, businesses spend money. Okay, I can.
Yeah, ledgers
I know what it means to spend money.
I know ledgers and debits, so something I know a little bit.
Right?
Yeah. Everyone knows a little.
With the How many people on the planet know how to set up traceability systems? Just not common, right? Like, so I think that there's a huge talent gap in supply chain. I think that, yeah, like the technology exists, but it doesn't necessarily exist in the format that is needed for a given use case.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is nothing that's needed for traceability that we don't have. RFID, barcodes, software, hardware. It's like we have it all. Right? It's just a matter of time. And the reason it takes so much time is because nobody knows how to do it. Right? It just takes a lot of work to level up, like, again, this is why I like software and data, because a lot of time is a month in our world.
Yeah,
right?
it moves
Like,
quick.
it moves quick and you can test things out. Whereas, you got that sheep in the background.
Yeah.
If you wanted to RFID that sheep, right? And your sheep supply chain, your cotton, whatever, wool, right? Supply chain, like, what are all the different things in place? Like, I don't know how this works. Like, how many people have set up traceability for wool?
I can tell you that, actually.
You're like, I know.
Yeah, in certain Australian states, it's a legal requirement to chip out your sheep. Yeah, so some places do, but sheep are it is a new skill. It is a new skill set, because it's not something that people talk about it as an extra expense, but it's something I've been wondering, because I've been in an industry where you had to do it, you sort of never questioned it, and I wonder how these industries that haven't done it.
Here's something else I'll say, going to like the entrepreneurship side of things, right? And one of the reasons why I really love QuickBuild, I think if you're listening and you're a practitioner, like if you do supply chain, if you do these things, you need to become a designer. I don't think we have enough designers.
What sort of designers do you mean?
I think looking at the full picture and saying, how would I do this the absolute best way possible?
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned batteries. Like, how would we set up traceability programs for batteries? Right? What's the absolute best way to do this? Right? Mapping everything out and saying, great, let's figure out how to really what's the bottleneck in the entire thing, and let's fix that bottleneck. Right? Like, is it the mining companies that don't have traceability? Is it wholesalers, or is it like what point does it break? And again, I don't know that, but people out there are listening who do. Go become a designer and design software and hardware that makes it easier for those groups to do what we need to do as a planet, which is better traceability, sustainability, blah, blah, blah. It's like all this stuff, right? Make it better, design it for the people doing the work. Think how hard it was for you as a practitioner to do X. Make it easier for the next generation to do it.
I see what you're saying. I definitely think QuickBuild would be well placed in a lot of these links along the supply chain that are suddenly going to have to start collecting data in a serious way, because it seems like an easy onboarding process. So I look forward to see what happens in the future. Right. That was a really cool.
That was my pitch for people to become entrepreneurs. Become an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs are designers, right? Like,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Design things, build things.
Very cool. Okay, that was a really interesting discussion. I've actually learned quite a few things, so I enjoyed that. Now, QuickBuild is quickbuild.io. Is that where you'd find it?
QuickBuildNow.com.
QuickBuildNow.com, and that's QuickNow. Yeah, .com. Very cool. And you said you had some kind of offer, free design for, what was the offer again?
Oh yes. So anyone that buys their Timo license, I will customize for free for 3 months. So 100% free customizations. I'll get the software exactly how you want it in the first 3 months. And in terms of license, it's $29 a month, so it's relatively cheap. We can serve globally, right? We can do any currency. So I have I'm in the U.S., but I have people all over the world that are interested in becoming partners, implementation consultants. That if support's needed more locally, like there's people I know that I can turn to that can help whoever is needed. So
Very cool. Yeah, everyone check that out. He'll customize the software for you. He won't be like SAP and try and customize you to the software. Very cool. All right.
that's right.
All right, Nathan. Good talking to you. Thanks very much. I learned a lot.
What a blast. Hey,
Cool.
thanks, Lewis.
Bye. Cool. I'm just going to stop the recording now.